During the late 19th century, America would emerge on the world stage as a power to be reckoned with. Before this time, the young nation had remained largely isolationist, focusing on its own domestic concerns. It had been involved financially with other nations, but had not become enmeshed in other nations' conflicts. All of that would change during the course of the Spanish-American War. By the 1890s, key American advisors wanted to see the nation expand its influence to become a global power. Alfred Thayer Mahan famously argued that America needed a strong naval fleet and strategically located naval bases if it hoped to be considered a serious force. The opportunity to make this vision a reality was presented when an uprising occurred in Cuba. Then a colony, Cuba's residents wanted to throw off Spain, their colonial oppressors. As they began to struggle for freedom and independence, some Cubans came to the United States and tried to encourage Americans to support their cause. America would decide to enter the conflict when the U.S. battleship the Maine blew up in the Havana harbor in February 1898, killing 260 sailors. At that time, the press and the American people assumed this was an act of treachery by Spain. Later, it was revealed that this was simply a mechanical error, but by then, the nations were at war. Theodore Roosevelt became one of the most famous figures of the Cuban conflict, leading his band of Rough Riders at San Juan Hill. Roosevelt's volunteer regiment included many sons of wealth and privilege who were looking for adventure. Roosevelt was later criticized for his bloodlust and poor leadership style. He refused to wait for orders and put many of his men at risk. But in his own mind and in his memoirs, he painted himself a hero. The Cuban conflict would end quickly. America's involvement in the war created more problems than it solved, however. Although the United States had become involved to help liberate Cuba and avenge its losses, officials quickly expanded their plans once they were on the winning side of the conflict. Thinking back to the philosophy of manifest destiny, some questioned why the United States should stop expanding simply because it had reached the West Coast. American values and political ideals were worth exporting and sharing with the world, they argued. As Spain left the conflict, they gave the Philippines to the United States for $20 million. This triggered major debates between Americans. Should the United States keep the Philippines as well as Spain's other territories after the war came to an end? Should the nation become an empire? On the one hand, colonial holdings would give us economic strength. They would provide raw materials and workers and a market for our exported goods. They would also provide locations for those strategic naval bases that we so needed. On the other hand, how could we justify becoming an empire? Hadn't we broken away from the British Empire because we believed in the rights of nations to be self-governing? This was made more complicated by the fact that the Filipino people did not want to be a part of any empire. Emilio Aguinaldo led his people bravely against the Spanish and then against the United States. The Filipino conflict was not a splendid little war, as some had called the Spanish-American conflict in Cuba. In the Philippines, over 4,000 Americans would die, as would 20,000 Filipino troops. As many as 200,000 Filipino civilians would also perish. The Spanish-American War had raised critical questions about race and American identity. Some Americans did not want to see the nation become an empire because they feared the assimilation of people of Filipino, Cuban, or Puerto Rican descent. They feared that the connections of empire would encourage immigration and that such flows of immigrants would dilute America's Western European population. Their views were influenced by social Darwinism, a popular theory at the time. Based loosely on the theory of evolution, which argued for the survival of the fittest, social Darwinism applied that analysis to human interactions. The fittest races, or even the fittest nations, were believed to be discernible by their success. What did it mean to be an American in a nation made up of immigrants? In the era's popular metaphor of the melting pot, all the various ethnicities were melted together to create a homogeneous blend of Americanism. Later generations would challenge this view, picturing the country more like a salad in which the various ingredients harmonize but maintain their original flavor. At the turn of the century, though, the dominant vision remained one of an overarching American identity, into which various immigrant groups should feel lucky to assimilate. With the Spanish-American War, America had entered onto the global stage. Never again could the country be ignored in terms of foreign affairs. It had debated the question of empire, but had reached no satisfying conclusions. The status of Puerto Rico and the Philippines would remain in flux for years to come.